Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism Midweek Special. Great to have you here. Hope you and yours are well. Got a really special guest today. I'm absolutely chuffed to bits, as well as a wee bit nervous actually. With my guest, an ex-deputy head editor of the Herald, as well as the executive director of the Daily Mail for Scotland. A very well-known journalist, probably one of the few journalists, real journalists we have in Scotland. And in his Twitter bio, he has journalist, Glaswegian, Celtic man, and his pronouns he, him, my type of guy. It's Kevin McKenna, folks. Mr. McKenna, welcome to Through a Scottish Prism. Thank you very much for being our guest.
No bother, my pleasure, Roddy.
It's as I said to you, I mean, you've got quite an you've been in the journalistic world, you know it well. And at this last general election, I know you were touring the country. How would you describe this? It was a strange election, was it not?
Well, it was strange in that everybody. It's the first election I've experienced either as a professional journalist or just, you know, even since the age of 16 when I was first kind of got involved in party politics. It's the first one since then, that was 79, where the result, everybody knew what the result was going to be. And not only did they know what the result was going to be, because, yeah, okay, we've known a couple of times that, you know, during the Thatcher years, that the Tories would probably win, but it's the first time that I can remember, and I mean, maybe some of your viewers will correct me in this, that not only did we know in advance what the result was going to be, but we knew that it was going to be a landslide. It was just a matter of, you know, how big a landslide. Even before 1997, there weren't that many people predicting that Labour, Tony Blair's Labour, would win by as many seats as they did. And since then, polling has become sharper, much more accurate. And that was shown when the first exit poll came out, and it said that the SNP, I think, were going to only get 9 seats. And we were all like, I think I was in Aberdeen at the time. That was the one that surprised us. We didn't see that coming. We knew they were going to lose a lot of seats, but not as many as that. And of course, the prediction was almost spot on. So yeah, it was strange from that point. You're kind of, you know, I was speaking to a couple of Tories. I spent half a day with Douglas Ross, and you could tell, you know, he knew they had no chance across the UK. This was before his little local trouble, which resulted in him running for that seat and losing it. But it was strange from that point of view. Everybody knew, and the Tories that I spoke to were just trying to kind of drum up a little bit of verve, but you could tell their heart wasn't really in it.
But did you not think, I found it was one of the first elections ever, there wasn't really a theme. I've talked about this before, you know, in 79 we had, you know, it'd been the winter of discontent, we had the Falklands War election, we had the Brexit, we had the, you know, all the different things. There was actually, as you say, this was all a foregone conclusion. There was nothing that you could hang your hat on and say, this is the election of whatever. Yeah.
I think in a column the other week I mocked this concept of change, because this was the mantra that was obviously going out every day on the messages, the text messages, the WhatsApp groups in the Labour Party. It's all about change, 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 change. But every party says that. Every party in every election, you know, who thinks they've got a serious chance of not every party, every opposition party going into an election says it's change. Well, it's just been rendered meaningless. The SNP were saying it as well. And in some, ironically, if it had been a far closer contest, if the Tories had gone in with a far better chance of winning, I wonder if Starmer would have been compelled to put some meat on the bone, to be actually, actually come up with some specifics. But we knew, and he knew from as much as a year ago, he was going to win. He was going to win handsomely. So why burden himself with any specific policies? And there was kind of overtures of the SNP and their approach to independence, because the Labour Party's mantra, when you spoke to them or you criticised them about not having an agenda that was authentically socialist or in any way Labour, they said, no, just wait, just give us your vote, and then once we're in, then you'll see our true colours, which is exactly the same with what the SNP have been saying for the last 10 years, East for Indy, all that nonsense. Just get us in and everything will be okay. We'll do what has to be done. Absolute nonsense. Takes the voters for idiots. And of course, it's lasted a week. And similar with Labour's the 3-term majority in 1997, we were all told then that Gordon Brown and Tony Blair were going to reverse the anti-trade union laws,
abolish the House of Lords.
Yeah, and I remember speaking to people in the East End of Glasgow, I think during the 2015 election, and these were former Labour voters who were now intending to vote for the SNP, and one of the main reasons that I was hearing then for their decision to do that was that they had been sickened by the fact that Brown and Blair hadn't unstitched the anti-trade union laws. They hadn't rode back on the neoliberal attitudes of Thatcher and the ravages that she'd made to working class communities. And now the SNP are in the same boat, and now we've got, well, the SNP have been criticising the same thing, and we've now got Starmer, who's got, you've got to say that's a 3-term government, a 3-term majority he's got. But what happens within 2-3 weeks, the first indication that he could have given that things really are going to change, that they really are going to try and unstitch the inequalities and the attitudes of the Tories, doesn't do it. No, I wasn't convinced. Was anybody really convinced? I mean, as soon as I saw him, I think it was maybe a couple of years ago. Remember when Boris Johnson was getting all of his ministers, whenever they appeared on the BBC, to have a massive Union Jack in the background, and then all of a sudden, within a little while, Keir Starmer doesn't just have one Union Jack behind him; he's got 2 Union Jacks behind him, and you're thinking, who is this clown? What does he take us for?
Yeah. But actually, you talked about the landslide, and they did have a landslide, but wasn't it more of a collapse in England of the Tories and the SNP collapse? It wasn't people rushing to Labour in any great enthusiasm.
No, but they will still proclaim it.
Of course.
As such, and they will, they will make comparisons with Tony Blair in 1997. I think one of the reasons why there were such poor, paltry turnouts in so many constituencies was because there's very little to choose in terms of social attitudes between Labour and a lot of Tory policies. And any Labour voter, anybody who voted Labour who was daft enough to think that there's going to be some kind of social revolution, that the balance is going to be tipped back towards working people, well, they can forget that now, because it's just not going to happen.
No.
It just won't happen.
No, well, they had an opportunity to get rid of the 2-child clause, That would have been a great signal, a good sound, and the bedroom to actually get rid of them in his.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
he didn't. Steady as you go.
Yeah. And military defence spending will go up. Talk of patriotism, Ukraine, etc., will continue. It's depressing how easy people have been taken for a ride, or allowed themselves to be taken for a ride. And again, it's the same way that the SNP have treated their supporters too.
And the Tories have. I mean, it's just the way politicians operate. They all get the votes and then shit on their voters. I mean, the other thing is the Tories in England will not admit that Brexit is actually what they was their undoing, and it was all the fallout, in my humble opinion, from Brexit, the economic fallout that came from that absolutely screwed them. Same as the SNP in Scotland will not admit that it was their dropping independence and moving to the gender issues that screwed them. They just won't face it. So neither party is going to have a quick comeback, are they?
No. The Tories will have to choose the right leader, somebody that can face down Starmer. And I mean, in some ways, whoever comes in as the new leader of the Conservatives he's got a clean bill of health. Nobody's expecting anything of him. Or in fact, I happen to think it'll probably be a female. And they're not exactly going to be menaced by or they don't have to come up with policies on the hoof. They don't have to worry about the opposition exposing them. They've got a few years to regroup, which they will do. And the only thing they have to worry about is Keir Starmer stealing their clothes. Starmer's not going to, again, I would have expected him to at least have explored the possibility of a new relationship with Europe, whether that is, having another referendum some way down the line. If industry demanded it, if it was shown over the next few years that not so much Brexit, but the extreme form of Brexit that we were taken into has resulted in job losses, has resulted in British industry being undermined. I would have thought the Labour Party would have said, look, at some point we might be open. If we listen and depending on what we hear, we might be open to looking at going back into Europe. Because as I said before, I think they're set fair for at least another 10 years.
I mean, they could say EFTA, where, they're rule takers, not rule makers, but they then get access to the single market. Yeah,
but they don't, that just seems to be, it's, Starmer just wants the path of least resistance. There's not a radical bone in his body. This lie about change, there's not going to be any change in the way that you or I or most people would understand it. That would have been a possible change, as you said, just to signal their willingness to consider an EFTA arrangement. But that would have been change. It's just too radical.
Because they would worry about freedom of movement, and that would then get the old racists down south kicking off. That's why they wouldn't do it. It's that pathetic. I mean, it really is. In Scotland, as I say, the problem is the SNP, if they do not radically change, in my opinion, they're going to get slaughtered in 26.
Yeah, I agree. But it's not going to happen. I mean, that was July the 4th. What's today's date? July the 25th. So 3 weeks ago today, with that election. Have you heard anything from
nothing
the party
nothing
that would signify that they're, they think they might be in trouble, that they think that a reset is required. Nothing. You know, you know, judging by their responses, their collective responses, you would have thought the SNP hadn't lost any seats. You know, there's no sense of crisis, no sense of urgency. So, you know, Swinney will do what that party has been doing for the last few years. They'll just kind of keep their head down until it all goes away. And they'll just keep looking at, you know, oh, independence, support for independence is still high. And there will be no examination of conscience. There won't be any kind of internal inquiry into why they lost so many seats. Because, you know, if there was a proper inquiry, they would come up with reasons. It would come up with stuff that they don't want to hear.
Exactly, that's the problem. I mean, what I've also noticed is, you know, people who have lost their seats suddenly have found their voices.
Yeah.
You know, like Mary Black saying, well, this implosion, we could see it coming for years off. Well, why did you sit silent, Lilo? Why didn't you do something then? Tommy Shepherd, Stuart McDonald, Alan Smith, they're all saying it.
Yeah.
But they were the ones that caused it.
Yeah. But they're deluding themselves, and I suspect a few of them are looking for a seat in 2026 or a high placing on the list. Yeah. But if any of those clowns, if their names appear on the lists prominently, the party won't be forgiven. They can forget about winning in 2026. And in some ways, and this is, you know, you were talking at the start of the programme about the kind of curiosities of this election, if any. I suppose now that when I think about it, one thing that was not odd but very unexpected was the amount of SNP voters that I spoke to who were actively hoped that the SNP would lose a lot of seats, and how many of them as well were saying that they hoped that they will lose in 2026, because only by being in opposition could a cleansing of that party take place at the top. Like all the people who have been responsible for what happened in 3 weeks ago, the hollowing out of the party. It's the only way that we can ensure these people leave the room and are never seen again.
But the other one, they don't get it, because here's the thing. Stephen Flynn this week called for a meeting of the 4 nations to talk about eradicating poverty. Why don't you call a constitutional convention in Scotland and start really talking about eradicating poverty once and for all? They're so sucked into the British way of doing it, and we've discussed this in our programme a lot of times. You are not going to beat the British playing by the British rules, because as soon as you look as if you're going to win them, they're going to change the rules, and only they know the rules. It's madness, as we're seeing across the water with Sinn Féin, who are going to get their border poll without a doubt, who have abstained and kept away from Westminster. And it started back in 1918 when the Irish Parliamentary Party went the way of the SNP, got too comfy and settled down, and Sinn Féin came in and didn't take up their seats. Surely you would think someone in you know, Jackson's entry would be saying, John, listen, mate, we've got to change.
Well, there isn't. You know, have you seen the advisors? Have you seen anybody that's leaving the party? That's leaving their roles? They're all still there. There's nobody in Jackson's Close that is saying this. You know, over the last few years, the SNP have just become a job creation scheme for a certain type of probably younger nationalist, somebody who's a true disciple, and and they have been chosen, handpicked for their absolute and utter loyalty to Sturgeon, first of all, and now to the kind of general organisation that the SNP has become, which has got nothing to do with independence. It's about maintaining power for power's sake, for having as many, returning as many as they can possibly get. I would have been far happier if, and I think this should happen at some point, if the SNP had signalled a few years ago that the next UK election, they would signal their intention not to take their seats at Westminster. That would have been a clear message of intent, and it would have got headlines around the world, and it would have proven to the rest of us that they were authentic about this.
Yeah.
And I don't, it's not as if any of them could turn around and say, well, actually, by being there, we've achieved X, Y, and Z. I mean, have the SNP even, when they got those 57 seats after 2015?
No. I wrote an article once, and it's from 1934 when the party was founded till last week, if you like. Two things have only ever been successes in Westminster. One of them was an amendment to an English fox hunting bill, and the other one was getting the claim of right nodded through with no, when they've never used the claim of right, but that's only two things since 1934. But what they have had and what corrupted them, what's that old phrase, follow the money, Kevin? Yeah,
of course. Yeah, they got the short money.
That's what corrupted them, and they've settled for that. I mean, and I've got to say, as an ex-member of both the SNP and the Alpa party, I at conference at the Alpa tried to put through a motion of abstentionism, and I was shot down by the two MPs and by Alec, because in my opinion, not just them, but all the ones as well in the SNP, they're institutionalised. They've got Stockholm syndrome.
No,
so that goes, and that we can't win.
I've seen this. I've actually seen it in action when I've been down at Westminster, watching them operate. And it's, at a human level, it's very difficult to resist the charms and the folderols of Westminster. It is a magnificent place. Power, prestige, authority, history, tradition seeps out of every corner, every statue, every wall, every room. You can't help but get swept up in it and feel that you've arrived, that you've achieved something, that you're part of something far, far greater. And that's what it's designed to do.
Yeah.
Anybody who goes there wanting to be a firebrand and to change the world, and I'm sure quite a few of them do in all parties. As soon as they walk through those doors, that place has been designed and has been built to basically undermine, destroy, and shake and intimidate you if you have any of those feelings of actually wanting radical change or wanting to change the system. And we've been here 800 years. Look at the statue of Cromwell. This is where King so-and-so, that's more or less saying to you, don't even think about changing anything or doing anything radical, because we've seen off far, far greater than you.
I mean, going back to the times of the Labour feeble 50, who viewed themselves as much superior, because when they were losing Holyrood, they were complaining because it was their second 11 that was in Holyrood, because it wasn't really important to them yet. I mean, you had exceptions like Donald Dewar, who was one of probably the only big hitter they ever had. Can't think of another one. But they had that attitude, and I bet that attitude will go back again just now with the ones they're sent down there.
Well, I mean, I have to laugh when I hear references to Labour's feeble 50, because has there been any group more feeble than the 57
never.
that the SNP originally sent down?
Well, 56 out of 59 actually, without being pedantic. But what I wrote about and said often was that when they were doing the Scotland Bill, they put in over 100 amendments, those 56. Not one of them got accepted. David Mundell, Ian Murray and Carmichael, along with the English MPs, threw them all out. Now that's the point where a leader worth their salt would have turned around and said, right lads, up the road, on the phone to Cameron and saying, till you start behaving properly and meet the promises that you gave us with a vow, we ain't coming back. We're abstaining from your place. That would have got global headlines. That would have put pressure on the British government. And with 56 out of 59, it would have frightened the bejesus out of them, would it not?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I spoke to Angus Brendan McNeill, to Joanna Cherry at various points in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 others. And there were occasions when there were opportunities to pressurise, to put some pressure on the UK government, not least when Joanna Cherry was one of the main architects of Boris Johnson's humiliation over his attempts to prorogue Parliament, but also following Brexit. And there were certain individuals within the SNP who were saying, you know, there has to be a clear strategy, a step-by-step guide, blueprint, you know, route of travel, if you like, to maximise any of the few opportunities that come our way, to advocate or to campaign for a second referendum. They weren't interested. You know, Angus McNeill and Chris McElhenney were openly shouted down at party conferences for trying to propose a plan B, which then 2 years later, Nicola Sturgeon takes up. I mean, they were hounded, they were marginalised within the party for having had the temerity to look at a plan B. And you know, we all saw what happened to Joanna Cherry when she attempted to say what a lot of the rest of us were thinking, that you've sacrificed independence in favour of this highly divisive gender ideology. So, you know, it was the route of travel of the party leadership was just to dampen any talk, any enthusiasm for independence. And that meant having no truck with any proper strategy. I mean, I had a chat with Kevin Pringle not long after, in fact, within days of the 2014 referendum. Kevin Pringle, for those that don't might not know, was Alex Salmond's chief of staff, and then also Nicola Sturgeon for a while. And I said to Kevin, so, you know, our side's main weakness that was exposed in the referendum campaign was the economic argument. And we knew that was going to be the most difficult one. So I said, I'm assuming that, having identified that over the next few years, we're going to have a lot of work. A lot of work is going to be done addressing the economic perspectives for an independent Scotland in readiness for the next referendum. And Kevin agreed. And I think I might have written this for the Observer, that, you know, I was hopeful. And this was another conversation, not with Kevin Pringle. I was hopeful, based on a couple of other conversations, that the SNP were going to have like a special economic task force, and not just economic advisors that they kind of hire from time to time, and you know, you get the headlines that they've hired this, they've hired him as part of the Economic Council of Advisors. I'm talking about engaging 2 or 3 of them full time for a few years and be told, we don't want to see you again for another 3 years until you've come up with a hard and fast, you know, complex robust argument for how an independent Scotland can thrive. And I think quite a lot of other nationalist supporters or people who voted yes would have expected that as well. But it became clear within a few years there was nothing. You know, all you all you got at this time of the year, if you'll recall, remember those few years where all we got was there was going to be an SNP leadership, an SNP summer camp to talk about the next steps for independence.
The secret plan.
I mean, I don't even know if any of those camps happened. Because I remember over the course of about 3 years, yeah, we're going to have everybody, all the MPs, all the MSPs, all the advisors, we're going to go away for a camp to talk about, you know, how we're going to deliver independence. Then you never heard of it again.
No. And then Stuart MacDonald as well, who he, you know, old Redcoat, he could have been organising the summer camp. He'd have been got to be good at something, I suppose.
Well, I just think half of them down there at Westminster over the last few years basically treated Westminster as a summer camp.
Oh,
you know.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you take, with no disrespect to, she's a young lassie, but she was working in a fish and chip shop part-time, and then suddenly you're getting 85 grand a week plus $250,000 in expenses. It's a hell of a jump. And we're talking to Phil Boswell, the ex-MP, who I know very, very well. He was most of them up there thought all their birthdays had landed in one day. Very few, apart from Joanna Cherry, for Whitford and Phil and a couple of others, who actually took a pay cut. The rest are all happy days. And that was the problem. But I'd slightly disagree with you about the economic policy. If you look at how the Brexit election was won on the side of a bus, 350 million quid a week into the NHS, how they took Boris won a massive majority with just the side of a bus, get Brexit done, and didn't say much else except get Brexit done. So, and how Farage, you know, has risen with slogans and not actual any meat on the bones. It's only old, did I say, anoraks like you and I. I mean, how many people do you know have read a manifesto?
Well, I think the 300 and the side of the bus ads, the 350 million, I think that was pretty comprehensively dismantled. That became a form of ridicule, I think. I'm not sure it worked. Again, the Labour Party was completely out of touch with its constituencies in the northwest and the northeast of England, and again we see a kind of a reflection that this is reflected in the SNP being completely out of touch with a lot of its core voters, so that it never saw the disaster, the catastrophe of July the 4th happening. But I went round quite a few places in northwest, northeast England, just prior to Brexit, but also after it, and it became clear that these communities had voted for Brexit. They utterly resented being called racist by the Islington elite. They said that they very rarely saw these people in their constituencies, that they were totally out of touch with the economic challenges, the unemployment, the deindustrialization, the mass betrayal of the fishing communities, especially in the Humberside coast. And that wasn't the Tories. You know, the Labour Party had a hand in that as well. And they were telling me, if the Labour Party had kept in touch, or even valued the opinions of their supporters in these red wall communities, as they then became known, this wouldn't have been a surprise to them. They were voting for Brexit not because of any sense of exceptionalism, not because they were in any way racist. They were basically saying, our industries have disappeared over the last 20 or 30 years. Our living circumstances, our incomes, our job security have gone down, and this is partly due to the European Union. And if anything, they were the opposite of being racist, because they were saying that the European Union's laws had allowed poor Eastern European people to travel across borders, and also to be paid. They permitted employers to pay them at the rates that they would have been paid in their own country. So that's what employers in the UK want to hear, because that means that they don't need to adhere to any kind of local trade union bargaining. They can pay these poor people bobbies and get away with it. And this would cause resentment. It was basically mistreating poor foreign people, and it was depressing the local labour market. So these people in northeast, northwest England, they weren't against this because of racism. They were basically saying Europe is allowing poor Eastern European immigrant labour to be paid slave wages at the expense of our jobs. It's allowing companies to profiteer, and that's not part of the European dream that we were all told. This is basically a cartel for very, very rich countries to get even richer and to lay down the law to poorer countries, as we saw with Greece. The profiteering of the German banking bonds. And there's still, I've still got a degree of sympathy with that.
Yeah, I think the EU chickens are coming home to roost now. I don't see it surviving. I really don't. It's I was very pro EU. I mean, I live in Spain most of the year now, so I was very pro. When I came here, we were still in the EU. But now I wouldn't go into the EU. EFTA, yes, but I wouldn't go near the EU. It's become the exact opposite of, as you say, of things that it was founded on. In my opinion, it was going to be the end wars and be a neutral and be an honest broker. Now it's become just a mouthpiece of the United States foreign policy. It's become pro-war. It's supporting war.
Don't even get me started on NATO.
Oh well, I've got it on. It's on my notes here. Actually, I'll be coming to that one, Kevin. I'll be coming to that. But if I could just slightly, before we do that, just flip back a bit, going back to one of the things you're talking about, the Red Wall there and how they switched to the Tories. I go back to my earlier point where in Scotland they didn't, or anywhere in the UK, didn't run to Labour. Working out the numbers, I figure out it was actually Wings put the number out, so therefore I take it as accurate. 700,000 of the people who voted yes in 2014 just stayed at home.
Yeah,
they didn't, and that is the. Now, if go back to, if you're in the SNP, you've got to, surely someone's turning around and saying, "Listen, guys, we've got 700,000 votes just sitting there. We've got to get them back in again."
But
that's got to be the way forward, isn't it?
Yeah, but this process of self-delusion started within hours of the result 3 weeks ago, because the narrative had obviously been going around all the WhatsApp groups that that the SNP had just been caught out in the desire to get rid of the Tories. That was the real reason, and it didn't really signal anything to be worried about in terms of the broader independence question. Absolute nonsense. Only one Tory lost their seat. It was never going to matter up here anyway. But they're deluding themselves at the moment. I can guarantee you this, Roddy, nobody's asking that question. Nobody's asking that question about how did we lose 700,000? Because they've already decided, it was just one of these kind of generational quirks that.
Or they're all homophobes. They're all transphobes.
Yeah, we kind of saw that with the hate crime speech, the narrative.
Yeah, I mean,
which they don't like. They don't like the SNP leadership or elements of them actively loathe ordinary working class people. And that came out in the hate crime bill, that they don't have the right pronouns. Yeah. Their speech is untutored. They're full of hate. You know, again, this is another hallmark of their characteristic at their time at Westminster. They, you know, over the last, how many times over the last few years did you hear Ian Blackford and you know, and Stephen Flynn saying it as well? You know, we're going to stand up for Scotland. We're going to stand up for Scotland. How do you stand up? In what way, shape or form do you stand up for Scotland? By telling the international community that Scotland is a hate-filled, bigoted wee country, full of people who drink too much, who smack their wains, who are incapable of reasonable, decent speech, and are to be for the watching 24/7. What's that going to do for driving inward investment, or making us look good in the global stage? In my opinion, the SNP have done, not only have they done more damage to independence, Scottish independence, than the Labour or the Tories put together, they've also done more damage to Scotland's international standing. Yeah. And they might think that, you know, a COP26 or COP27 making appearances there will increase their standing, but it doesn't. It increases their standing or individuals. It'll get them. It'll get some individuals some private invites, maybe a wee lecture tour, maybe a commissioner's job when the time is right with the EU, NATO, just as the Labour Party had done after they lost a lot of their seats. Certain Labour bigwigs who fled into the arms of global corporatism. They've actively worked to undermine the reputation of Scotland internationally.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're talking about COP24 and whatnot. I tell you, we did more than anything, and I was part of that. Private MacLeod in the Tartan Army in Germany did more to boost Scotland and Scotland's reputation than 1,000 members of Parliament or Holyrood or any Visit Scotland or anything. The ordinary working class guys out being Scottish working class guys, loud, noisy, great fun. What a laugh. Loved it, apart from the football. Football was rotten, but the rest of it was great. So maybe the government needs to employ the Tartan Army and Visit Scotland, stop everything you're doing, and just use the Tartan Army from here on in.
Well, my only issue with that, Roddy, is that sometimes I think that the Tartan Army, sometimes I think that they're just happy to be there. They're happy just to have a party, and if there was actual real anger, real hurt at our pathetic displays, not just, you know, in Germany, but over several years, I think the Tartan Army lets the Scottish football establishment get away with too much. You know, that.
Well, I don't want to defend the same, because our clubs don't do that great in Europe either, in comparison to smaller nations. But the fact is that for 300 and odd years, we've been browbeaten. Don't get ideas above your station. Know your place. You know, you should just be lucky to get what you've got. Be grateful for it. The fact that you qualified, yeah, you should be happy that. Don't get ideas above your station. That's been put into our psyche. Now you try and tell that to the Irish. They don't accept it.
See, again, we'll have to disagree here. You see,
well, that's good,
because I'm one of those. I mean, I'm uncomfortable even calling myself a nationalist, and I've been criticised by some, you know, lifelong SNP supporters for saying this. So my support for independence, Scottish independence, it's a preference. You know, and in my life, there's 4 or 5 things in my life which are more important than whether Scotland becomes independent. Independence is a preference. I hope it happens. I'm quite happy to take some of the risks, although it's easy for me to say because there's others that might not have the economic wherewithal to withstand the risks that there would be, and there will be risks. And I think, you know, our unwillingness to be honest about that, you know, has also proven to be part of our downfall. So for me, it's a preference, and I don't see us being occupied, browbeaten, or under the English jackboot. You know, we're basically, our next door neighbours are jolly old England. It's not, you know, Ceausescu era Romania. At any given time, you've got 450,000 English people who work and live in Scotland, and there's probably more than double that who thrive and live and work in England. And I think that, you know, if there is to be another referendum, we kind of need to look at how we need to look closely at how our relationship with England and the rest of the UK would proceed. We need to see England as a potential future ally. I mean, I kept saying to English people whenever I was invited on any of their shows during the 2014 that after independence, England is going to gain a friend. If England were truly menaced, which I don't really see happening, but if the British Isles, if Britain, former Great Britain, had a serious existential threat from overseas, you know, a lot of Scots in an independent Scotland would want to come to their aid because overseas, you know, any of these existential threats aren't exactly going to be recognising any border. It's just not going to happen. So I like England. I think that by and large, the people that we have to convince at the next referendum, you know, we've got to watch our language with them. And I don't think, and I'm talking about some of my relatives and friends who moved towards independence, or if they didn't, they could be persuaded the next time. They don't appreciate being told that that England has us in a straitjacket, because they'll look around them and say, we've got a good lifestyle. You know, we're a pretty affluent country. And if they ask you to name, and this is where I struggled with, if they ask you to name the ways that we've been kept down, or the areas in our life that could be much improved if we were independent, you know, I was struggling. I basically. Well,
how about the fact that we cannot decide who comes in and lives in our country?
Well,
we cannot decide who we have foreign relations.
I agree. I agree. But what I'm saying is that life ain't bad in the UK. All I'm saying is that I just think that we're a grown-up country. We've got our own traditions, we've got our own history, we've got our own culture, like so many others. It's no better or no worse than a lot of other independent countries. And I just said to my English friends, I just find it frankly insulting that you don't think that we can run our own affairs, given the assets that we have. You know, 5 universities in the top 200. You know, there's only 30 countries in the world that are oil producing. I mean, you've got the critics saying, "Oh, the oil's running out." Well, look, we've still got 30 or 40 years, right?
Yeah. Our Eva keeps saying they don't keep us to subsidise us. That's for sure. You
know, we've got an educated workforce. We've got the wind, coastal technology and potential, but that's another question for another program about what we're doing. So if I was going into the next referendum, I'd be saying, you know, life isn't, you know, life has been decent. It could have been a lot worse if it was other countries. All I'm saying is, you know, don't insult us by saying that we can't actually run our own affairs, even if it's going to be to the same quality as I just prefer to be signing my own checks.
Well, for sure. To me, it's not. I mean, I've been doing that. I've been Scottish nationalist all my life, all my voting life. I joined the party when I was at school in 1968, and I've always believed that it's never been about to be 20 quid better off or 20 quid worse off. To me, it's about democracy for a start, getting the government that you elect every time. This time we've been lucky. Scotland voted Labour. They got a Labour government, but 9 times out of 10, anytime there's a Tory government, we haven't voted for them, etc. So it's democracy, and it is just it's dignity. It's the having your own. But just one thing you said, you have to disagree with me about blah blah blah, and then you said, well, we've got a pretty good life. That is exactly what I said. We've been told, be grateful for what you've got. Don't aspire to more. We should aspire to more every time, but it's not just the mullet, in my opinion. It's about all those things because it brings me on nicely to NATO. I'm worried sick that more Scots lads are going to end up rushing over to Eastern Europe or into Gaza to fight for NATO, which is just an extension of American foreign policy. That is a problem that you see as well.
Yeah, NATO. Again, this is the kind of the distortion of language and what passes for intellectual thought in civic Scotland at the moment. So right now, at the moment, if you kind of raise any concerns or criticism of NATO, you're automatically called a Putin lover. And this is by people who don't seem to know how and why NATO was brought into being, its original principles, to what extent those circumstances have changed. We're getting told by people at Stuart McDonald. I quite like Stuart McDonald. I've got to say, I've criticised him. I quite like him. I think he's got a bit of integrity. Leave that aside. So him and Alan Smith, when they're doing their kind of NATO Twins Act, the SNP will get people who are saying the main reason why we should have a second referendum very soon after the first one was because the circumstances changed because of what happened with Brexit, because we were all told one of the benefits of staying in a union is staying in the European Union. Within a couple of years, that's out. So there's a principal reason. The goalposts have shifted. Same thing with NATO. NATO was brought into being to curb the influence of Russia, to bring America into the European theatre, to make sure that Nazism and the Germans were the German war machine was defeated. Well, America has been brought into the European theatre. Communist Russia the Soviet Union is no more. The Berlin Wall came down and Nazism was defeated. Now, I think there was only about 9 or 10 countries then. Now we've got 34. Margaret Thatcher herself warned against this in 1989 when there was all the talk of, after the wall came down, of the quick reunification of Germany. And she warned against it by saying that we have to give the Russian rulers something. We have to give them some face. We can't just stamp on them and humiliate them, because that will allow the opportunity for extremists in Russia to seek an opportunity. And what's happened, somebody like Putin was always bound to happen. And Putin's a psychopath. I firmly believe that. I'm actually surprised he hasn't been taken out by some of his own people. Again, that's another matter. But even a reasonably minded, even a Gorbachev, if you like, who, if they had been in charge over the last few years, would have taken umbrage, would have been alarmed and disturbed about the encroachment of NATO right up to their borders. NATO, we're not talking here about a kind of benign international confederation of people who want to kind of hold hands together and do nice deals together. It's a military alliance. So, even a reasonable ruler in Russia, like Gorbachev, would have been alarmed at the encroachment. Now, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have invaded Ukraine or done what Russia did or has done in Crimea, but it would have given an opportunity for some of the Mad Squad to get involved, and that's what's happened. And for anyone to say that, to question NATO's or to kind of cite NATO's conduct strategy over the last 20 years as a contributory factor in what's happening in Ukraine, to attack that and to say that that is characteristic of being a Putin lover is a lie, frankly.
Yes. I've been accused. I've been anti-war all my life. I was in anti-Vietnam marches all my life, and I said it in February 22. And I'd been watching what had been happening in Donbass before that, from 2014, with the slaughter of the people. And I said, let's have a ceasefire now and get this settled. With the Minsk agreements, that we didn't know, of course, that the West had reneged on them. Of course, immediately, well, you're a pro-Putinist, you're a Soviet. I mean, come on. It turns out that I'm a communist, fascist, pro-Putinist, Holocaust-denying, Hamas-loving psychopath. Did you know that, Kevin? You didn't meet any like me in a day. Right? It is quite ridiculous, some of the talk. But I worry, I'm scared. Are you scared that we're going to get involved in this fracas in the East?
Well, it's been going on for, what, nearly 2.5 years now. Very few of us thought that this would still be happening. And the stakes are getting higher with every passing month. And the amount of money that Britain and America have committed to Ukraine going forward, I mean, we're talking long-term financial commitment here.
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously don't think it's going to end anytime soon.
But isn't it just when we spoke about earlier how the Tories wouldn't admit Brexit was a mistake, the SNP won't admit gender was a mistake. The Americans and the Brits are not going to admit that going into Ukraine and all that with NATO was a mistake. They ain't going to admit it, so they've got to double down. That's what worries me.
Yeah, I if you accept, and they're all saying this as well, if you accept that Putin is a psychopath, then you also have to accept the possibility that he has factored in the possibility of escalating this. That he's
Don't
not
you think he's shown remarkable restraint? Could you think the Americans, if the Russians were supplying the Mexicans and the Mexicans were firing missiles into America, do you think America would show such restraint?
No, I think no, because Putin also knows that the kind of military hardware that is ranged against him, if
he seems to have defeated it.
Well, we're 2.5 years in, and Ukraine, you could say that Ukraine has held on longer than we would have expected. But because Putin is not a reasonable person, it's well within his capability and his mindset to escalate this in an unpredictable manner. And I don't even want to guess or think about how he might do that, especially if he's, I mean...
You're not more worried about the West escalating than...
No, I'm not.
Russia could have escalated this at any time.
No, but they've still got that up their sleeve. I think if Russia was being seen to be defeated here, was, if Ukraine were suddenly to make kind of massive or significant gains and encroachments, I'd be kind of worried about what Putin did and then how the West would respond. And that's what will bring a lot of our armed forces into that conflict. I mean, you're maybe I'm kind of I'm too optimistic about the West's operations.
I think so.
I can't see them. I mean, I genuinely can't see. I say the UK, but anything the UK does will be dictated by America.
That's the same in Europe.
I suppose, I mean, while I'm talking, I'm actually beginning to think, of course, you forget that there's a good chance that Trump is going to win the election, and he's he's just
the only American president since the Second World War that hasn't started another war.
I know.
It's quite scary, and you're thinking Trump, and we'll get some peace in Ukraine. I know it's a difficult one when you're going.
I mean, Trump seems to have deluded himself that he gets on really well with Putin, and he thinks he can, if he gets elected, he can just fly over to the Kremlin and have a wee chat with Putin over a nice cup of tea and say, "Look, come on, can't we just be pals? What are you doing here? We'll help you. You know, we'll call off NATO. You know, we will force NATO to kind of retreat a little bit, and you come out of Ukraine." But that's not going to happen. No.
On your optimism, because the clock's beating us, Kevin, I can sit here and talk to you probably for the next 3 weeks. Well, not 3, because the season starts in 2, doesn't it? We both have to go to the game. So, do you see any optimism for our lovely country of Scotland? Anything you're optimistic about? Throw them a bone, Kevin.
Oh God, you've got me. You're asking me at the wrong time. I've come to loathe the SNP as an organisation, and I've now realised I've kind of accepted that there probably won't be independence in my lifetime.
Yeah, never mind.
But then, you know, I speak to the likes of Jim Sillars, who I interviewed a few months ago, and I've spoken to some other old independent supporters who've been fighting the battle and making the arguments since before I was born, and are still with us. And they've done it selflessly. You know, there's a tendency of people like me, you know, who kind of came late to the show in 2012, I think, which is just 12 years ago, to want the quick fix, to want it to happen now, to feel personally slighted that it hasn't happened, you know, to be discouraged that it didn't happen as soon as I wanted it to happen. And then you speak to Jim and some of the others, and they're like, no, we just need to keep chipping away. We just need to maintain the presence, keep the arguments. There's a lot of people who've given their entire lives to the independence movement, and a lot of them died even before the referendum.
Yeah.
I know that some of them, even just to have been alive when the referendum was happening, would have seen that as a triumph. You know, the fact that it was being debated and that it was going to be binding. So you think of the memory of these people, and you're going, you know, what's my preferences? Nothing, you know, just a hill of beans. So yeah, that's my optimism. My optimism rests in the enduring legacy of people like Jim Sillars and yourself and some of the others, rather than a joke.
I say to people, I was convinced in November 1967 that we would have independence when Winnie Ewing won in Hamilton. All that was left to be answered was when and how. Most people with England have done it through the barrel of the gun. Fortunately, we haven't, and hope to God it never does happen that way. I'm still remain optimistic. I mean, it's a hard struggle. We're at the bottom of the hill again. We've got to regroup. We've got to come together. We need unity, and hopefully that'll happen. Kevin, as I say, the clock has beaten us. This has been
I know. I need to get into town.
Yeah, and I need to get into the garden. I'm roasting here. I'm absolutely roasting. Thank you so much.
No bother, my pleasure, Roddy. Any time.
Oh, now you've put yourself in a position. There will be another time. So, you, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have listening to Kevin. And until we see you again, you and yours, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.